Hello, and welcome to the NEWSPASTE Podcast. And here this week is a beautiful man. You can call him Borealis. He's a connoisseur of culture, a philosophical man, not afraid to tackle a tough topic or examine any field of thought. And he's proved that he will speak to anyone, those, including those who people choose to censor or ignore. And you'll find Al's Forum Borealis on things like Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, YouTube, etc., but also at forumborealis.net. And the people he speaks to and the subjects he explores will be of particular interest to my audience, who enjoy hidden histories, myth and lore, and the New World Order and its creation. And what was behind it, that sort of like phenomenon that made all of these things manifest. And we're going to have a really nice free-form conversation today about loads of different topics, and I hope you really enjoy. Al, how are you today?
I'm excellent. Thank you for having me on. Pretty stoked.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So what do you want people to know about you? Who is Al projecting himself out to be? Like the sentient being who lives on Earth, who wants to talk to people. What do you introduce yourself as? How do you describe yourself?
Well, I always try to keep myself somewhat in the background of the focus. I really hate talking about myself, but like you pointed out right before we started, sometimes your information and the conveyor of it merges. Now, for me, I use the slogan paradigm expansion. So although your listeners are primed to much of what we are covering, there will be stuff that's just too deep down, or maybe I should say detours in the rabbit hole that's not for them. But that's not just true for your listeners, it's true for any listener I have, because I cover so many different subject matters and we go deep into all those subject matters. So I'm bound to hit a wall or on something that my listeners can't relate to, because they are a heterogeneous group. And that's fine, because I prime them, and I'm sure the same is true for your listeners, to say that, look, I'm not trying to shovel down your throat a particular opinion, a particular conviction. All I want to do is provide you data point, like journalists like you do, via my guests and the topics we cover and the perspectives we put out, because I'm honest about having a perspective. I'm not pretending to be neutral. But you consider these data points and you integrate them. And another last thing I'm going to say about this thing that is very important for me is that I'm against this knee-jerk need people have to immediately form an opinion about something. Look, man, if something is unexplainable to you, if something is mysterious, if something doesn't jive or the dots doesn't fit, put them on the shelf. Don't forget about them. And when you see they fit in the big picture, then you put them in. Or if that never happens, at least you are aware of them. Let's say before the UFO disclosure, right? If you couldn't get that to jive with the mainstream paradigm, and you were really unsure about, the reality of it, and we still are. I mean, even if they acknowledge the phenomenon, no answers are given. All I'm saying is know that they are a part of existence. They're a part of our collective reality. What, why, when? There's no urgency to find out. Have them there, revisit them, and from time to time see if it fits, and live with that. Because when you die, you're going to die with a lot of ignorance. You're never going to know it all anyway.
Yeah, you are preaching, brother. To me, you're preaching to the choir, because I tell you, one thing that I like, I started off journalism thinking, I'm going to find all the answers and I'm going to find them quick and I'm going to push them out and I'm going to learn to write articles quick, just like they do in the mainstream media. They'll write 3-4 articles a week, pump them out, make everybody see the truth. And you're not saying like much anything, because you're not actually examining what's going on. You're not sitting back, taking it all in. You're not noticing. And I discovered that was where my journalism changed all of a sudden, really quickly. I did no longer. I was tackling subjects where I no longer needed to do it by a certain time. The things I was looking for were so hidden away and so unknown that there is no competition to find them. I can walk around and do whatever I like and look at the scene. And when I do street journalism auditing, I do the same thing nowadays. I walk up and down the street over and over again, and I watch all the people who are static, and I watch all of the people who are moving. And I make my decisions slowly on what I'm going to aim and what I'm going to focus in and what I'm going to look at, because there is no rush to find the answer, because those answers aren't real. They're illusory.
But let me ask you this: as a journalist, as an old school journalist, actually researching primary sources, actually having to put stuff down on paper so people can read it, actually providing us those data points I'm referring to. You are, by the very nature of that work, bogging you down into the details. But when you're a podcaster and you're having on people like yourself providing those, then you get the luxury of seeing the big picture, like bringing all the dots together, which is, I'm more there. You have one foot in each camp. So I'm asking you, like, are you saying that as you started podcasting, you started to more connect these different bits? Is it a problem, like having a big survey when you have to spend so much time into the details? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think I do. First of all, I'd say, trying to find out what's true or not is always going to be difficult, and you always have to have some form of multiple viewpoint to one bit of truth. So as someone, as you say, who's going through primary sources and stuff, I spend days getting rid of all my emotion about a subject, just completely become like, I spend days, oh my God, these people, oh God, look how disgusting it is, oh, look how stupid this is. And then I become stoic, and I become like information, gobble up information, and I become like a computer to an extent,
And that's the details.
Yeah. And when I'm going into the details, that sort of computerized mode of sort of research, I'm processing information, noting, tagging, writing lines. One thing I do is I sort things out into an order. We must order things. We always must order things if we can understand. And as soon as you've put something into a timeline, it makes sense. It makes sense all of a sudden. Yeah. And then you just insert information into the timeline, it makes more sense and it's more interesting. And what I discovered is that the reason why a lot of this sort of journalism is dead and why they're hiding away is because those details lead you to completely other rooms of information that have never been observed and never been looked at. And when you're talking about rabbit holes, you go and you look at you like to look at the grander bird's eye view. That's what I really wanted to speak to you about when we coming together today, because it's like, for me, you are quite right, and you've noted it. I'm there in amongst the detail, and I'm constantly trying to keep my bird's eye view, my Marcus Aurelius perspective in my head. I'm still trying to look down and think about what I'm doing and see it from a different angle, but it's really hard to do once you're in the detail. So I wanted to understand from someone who can see outside, because I think that's what you can do, isn't it? You can see exterior. What does the world look like? What does this world look like? How did we get from A to B? It seems like World War II, and like this culmination of mythos and culture caused this explosion of a new society being created behind the scenes. And you're able to talk to all of the people who can give you all of the bits of that. I'm one of the people who finds the bits to that. So I do understand that I'm on a bit scale, but I also know that as soon as someone like you is able to explain to me the tent that we are all camping under, then I know know what the boundaries of the land are, and I can go and find the other information. So you and me, our relationships, like the type of journalism we do, should be symbiotic, should be more that we are conversing, that you're helping guide the way here while we're helping you see the truth here, so what is it that you see the world like now, and where did it come from? It's so hard, such a hard question to grasp. I think you understand what I mean.
It's a huge question. Before I even go in that door you just opened, I want to kudos something you said, because timelines is to journalists what space lines measuring geographical units are to surveyors, right? That's how you get, that's one of the ways you get the big picture. It's true. As for your approach now to the subject matter, look, there's so many ways to answer that, but let me pose this suggestion. Reality, I mean, we are just a part of reality. How can a microbe understand in your body, understand the entire body? So we are born into a reality, into something. And I know you have experience with psychedelics, so it shouldn't be a problem for you to understand what I'm saying. How can a part of this huge universe reality understand everything? I mean, it's per definition a mystery. And then we are born at a time and a space where there's a consensus reality regarding that life, that world. And obviously, no one in history, maybe except for now, actually, has ever imagined that we know it all. It's just that this is the collective reality, and then everybody else have their own subjective reality adding to that outside of this overtone window. Okay, that's fine. Now, some has been more cheeky than others. I'd say certain streams of Sunnimus Islam, Catholicism at its worst, and now the new neocon, neolib, atheist, transhumanist paradigm. All of them have in common that, no, we know it all. And if you even try to go outside of this purview, you're done. You're crazy. We're going to finish you, whatever. So that's a little weird, living in a time where we pretend that everything is into this small overtone window. So I realized very soon that the only thing we know for sure is that we know nothing. And so that's why I have a more philosophical approach, because I could explain this existentially. I could explain it in many terms. But in terms of politics, that's probably the simplest area where we know that there's a lot going on that we don't know. And thank God that the exhausted term conspiracy theory that CIA launched to lure us away from asking critical questions about JFK assassination, thank God that has played out its usage, and all the other smears they try to put on us. So nowadays we can discuss almost, that's also weird. We live in a time where the censorship has never been this brutal and overt, and they never had that many means to do it. At the same time, we live in a time where every narrative is cracking left and right, partly thanks to people like you and even me. So that's kind of weird, but I guess that's how we have to approach it, that the reality is per definition fantastic, and we only know a little per definition, and that's a starting point.
Where do you think modern history starts? is it World War II? Does it feel like they were, because that's how it feels.
It's a big parting of the after World War II, I would say, is the new reset.
Yeah. Now there you go, reset, because I think, like, in a sense, the introduction of extreme enough, or the knowledge that extreme enough technologies are going to be introduced, causes resets by you can't stop it. It's automatic. So I think each of the industrial revolutions, in a sense, were acted as their own separate reset, where power was dispensed in a certain way, and as technology improved, we've seen that go on. And of course, the penultimate that leads to the explosion, and the explosion is beautifully exampled by the atomic bomb. Now, okay, so someone,
Hang on, I have to comment that.
Okay, go on.
You're very right. It's not just the tools of power that changed. It's not just the new narrative flushing out on the world market, but there's also new power players. That's very important to understand. Old power players fell. The Ottoman Empire isn't around anymore. They had half of Europe prior to. So a new power players came. And the very interesting thing is that as in the late 1800s, many of the power players coming on the scene then were, should we say, behind the scenes. They were puppet masters.
Yes.
This continued after the Second World War, only with new hidden factions of power. I'm not saying there's one big Illuminati controlling everything. That's the simpleton view. Yeah. All I'm saying is there was already an established world order where there's room for private players. And after Second World War, we have some new private and public players. A new public player, for example, is Israel.
Yeah.
And the Zionists.
So I tried
who, by the way, used to be a hidden power player back in the, late 1800s, early 1900s, because they had to.
Yeah. I'm like, I go back to about 1840s, 1850s. You start to see, obviously the rhetoric of creating a bigger order go as the technology increases, the technology increases. And by 1860, 1870, as really more sophisticated technology is coming in, you're seeing like this real understanding places centers of power like Harvard, them say presidents saying, right, we need to create a world order. We need to unite the countries of the world, and we need to be focused on what is important. And this was put within the ether during that time. And every generation, a very rich and powerful family might not have a next generation that actually does a good job, and lots of them just maybe they can last two generations with all of their money. But for instance, with Seagram's, with the Bronfman family, you've seen that it started to fall apart under Edgar Bronfman Jr. He was being silly with all of his money. He was associating with the wrong people. He wasn't a good businessman, and so his power and eventually their empire dissipated and just disappeared. Basically disappeared. They still got a lot of money, but all of these power players, they change generationally as well. Usually, sometimes they last, like I say, 2 generations, so you get like a 60 years of a burst of a family. But this is where some of the real big families in the turn of the 1800s are much more different, where they said, we can see this pattern. How can we maintain the wealth for our family going on past those couple of generations? So I think there was a knowledge, and people had examined themselves for long enough. And then World War One really was a big learning curve for everybody. And they knew already by the next 20 years that the atomic bomb, something big like that, was on its way. And so this was going to change everything, going to twist everything, turn everything on its head.
But here is very important to consider the zeitgeist. Most people who are not professional historians don't get that. And that's that in the zeitgeist prior to World War II, there was, I would say, 3 factors in power wielding. Number one, you pointed to, and that's still among us, and that's the elite families, elite members of the families. But there were 2 other impetuses for power back then. One was, and that's almost dissolved now, was ideology. Ideas, allegiances to certain ideas mattered. You could be an anarchist, you could be a fascist, you could be a communist, you could be a nationalist, you could be an Islamist, a Zionist. You would actually have loyalty to certain ideas. And this formed, together with the elite, it formed networks, which is the 3rd factor. Never was it more popular to be in a club than, let's say, between 1815 and 1915. Belonging to networks and identification with those networks was important. And Today, we have dissolved that physical components of human beings. We still do it kind of online, virtually, but it doesn't really have that, in the old days, if you wanted to surveillance someone, they were putting the heads together in certain tavernas or Masonic lodges or whatnot. They were physical, right?
Yes. In
Not
a
so
pie
much
shop, in Pudding Lane, in a pie shop somewhere. There's some
conspiration
really. Yeah, well, the
in the
Kit
real
Kat
sense of
Club.
the word.
I'm thinking of the Kit Kat Club, which was later revived by
For
Ghislaine
example.
Maxwell.
Yeah.
But early on, it had been like a kind of like its own like a society of thinkers that went on to be quite influential. But there's lots of like evidence of this after the time of the Glorious Revolution and this coup in Britain, where the monarchy, a new monarchy, European monarchy, was installed, and the previous monarchy was ousted, and no one talks about it much. They're like, oh yeah, wow, he will, William and Mary come along, and everybody was happy, and everybody said, yeah, all right then. And then this,
Wait a minute,
that
isn't it Windsor all the way?
no. You got the Tudors, you got
Okay, you're going back. Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you got what? Tudors, Stuarts, and then von Habsburg,
Right.
whatever. I don't know.
If I lived
They're
back
full
then, I would
title.
have been a Stuart.
But basically, there was at one point, you would have been in trouble. You would have been I would have been a parliamentarian, no doubt. I would have been
As long
there
as you're not
going,
a
damn you.
Cromwellist, I'm good.
That's what I am. That's what I would have been. I was
You
actually
would? Oh my
I was
God.
brought up in the 17th century, and my father's name was Colonel John Birch of Colonel John Birch's Regiment of Foot, and I was in a society called the Sealed Knot, which was like a 17th century reenactment society with 8,000 people fighting for charity. And every weekend we'd be in a different campsite, dressed up in 17th century gear, and I was on Oliver Cromwell's side. We were fighting under the army of Oliver Cromwell against, of course, King Charles and his evil. Oh God, we're going to chop that guy's head off. I tell you, we're going to chop his
He
head
kind of
off.
asked for it. I'm
Yeah,
more with his father. But I wanted to
yeah.
say about we just agreed there's a reset in 45, right? One of the reasons is that, like I said, the old philosophies are dying, like nationalism, communism, all that is being co-opted and kind of transcended. That's one of the three power factors, right? The second is networks. That's being hijacked by intelligence agencies because now starts the era of intelligence, right? So
Yes, yes.
they become today they're a community, goddamn it. That's what they want us to call them, right?
Yeah.
So
They're holding hands, they got rainbows, and some of them have got,
they
foo-foos, and some of
co-opt
them
everything.
don't.
There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah, they'll co-opt your woo-woo.
So the third is still untouched. Elites and their families.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How do we fondle that then?
Well, I mean, we're doing it right now, aren't we? And people are
Yeah, that's
aware. I
exactly
think they
it.
will. I think they will fall. I think to unravel the deep state, some of the huge secrets have to spill. Like
Mm-hmm.
the mother of your child does it very well in terms of the Epstein thing. We have, like I mentioned, the UFO thing is unraveling. Even the RFK. I mean, what a crazy time we're living in. It's like history is
Mm-hmm.
repeating itself on so many
Isn't
levels.
it just? Isn't
And
it
now the
just?
Kennedy is out there and he says they killed my uncle and my father.
Yeah.
Like secret after secret is spilling. And it's a race now. It's a race between the new media that you and me are
You're
on
right.
and the
Mm-hmm.
the old rotten grip of the old media because, everybody above, the boomers and above, they are still gridlocked
Yeah. They're still caught by. I mean, in Britain, the BBC is that perfect example of it.
yeah.
But all around, what people don't really get in countries like America and Britain is that they can say, like in America, you can say, "Well, I watch Fox and I don't like Fox anymore because of that Tucker Carlson." And someone will say, "Oh, well, you should watch CNN." And they go, I don't like CNN either. Okay, watch NBC. Oh, God, I don't like NBC. I'll watch it. Now, they may all be co-opted, but they're all co-opted in slightly different ways. So it gives them a sense of freedom. But if you're down somewhere in South America, you've got one channel telling you everything. And most like third world, what we describe as third world country, or more backwards than the West, do have just one channel, propaganda channel, that's putting information into people's minds. And I think a lot of the force that will come, that will back up Western ideology in the Northern Hemisphere, will come from sort of them using the Southern Hemisphere against the Northern Hemisphere, or less media savvy countries. I don't know if media savvy, not media savvy, like a good collection, a good range of media. Now, what you're talking about is this new media that's coming up, and the new media still has, like, some of it still has links to the old media, and there seems to be some sort of hereditary factor. There seems to be a familial factor. What would you say? Hegemony. There seems to be some hegemony. So I don't want to, some of their work is very, very, very good. You talk about a gray zone. Max Blumenthal is someone whose father was linked up and close with the Clintons.
Wow.
And in the same way, this strange sort of media figure that's outside is who Aaron Mate's father, Gabor Mate, was, and they like combined up together. And then you got Matt Taibbi hanging out with Aaron Mate and doing a podcast with him. And Matt Taibbi's father's kind of got like this whole like career behind him that even Matt Taibbi in the book about in some of the writers, the guy, I can't remember his name, the guy who Matt Taibbi set up the Russian newspaper they set up, I can't remember what it's called, in the '90s and the noughties. They set up a newspaper website in Russia, and it was really, really a suspicious sort of outfit. It was taking the piss out of Russian stuff all the time, but you could tell, like, why are you doing that? It doesn't make any sense. Well, in books and articles, he says, well, the guy who he's in business with was like, oh, well, Matt Taibbi had he had to go through his wild phase so then he could live to the standards of his father. He can follow in the footsteps of his father, and now you'll watch him, and that's basically what's happening. He's being placed up. There's this thing where it's just handed down generation and generation. Now, when this podcast goes out, by that time I will have released the first in a series of articles that no one has a clue is coming yet. Well, the level
Any
of
hint
it
for us clubs?
As long as you don't tell anybody in the meantime, on Friday will be released the Pottinger series, the beginning of the Pottinger, and it will follow John Stanley Pottinger. And John Stanley Pottinger, if you don't know who he is one of the main people on main lawyers for the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. And he was central to the case. He's central to the coming case too, that's still ongoing. But he's also obviously CIA. I've gone back right to the start,
narrative control.
Yeah, discovered his father was in something called Scottish Rites, which you can only get in if you're 32nd degree or 33 degree Mason. He was a Mason, he was Bohemian Grover, he was in all of the clubs, all of the societies, his father. And when his two sons came to power, well, his one son followed in his father's footsteps, become a city commissioner, and his other son was John Stanley Pottinger, ended up going through Harvard, the Harvard clique
So these are Americans.
Yeah. And he ended up in the Justice Department, and basically the story is going to show you how he was central in the cover-up of the assassination of Martin Luther King, Watergate, Kent State Massacre, that he was he harassed and set up basically a way to harass the people at Wounded Knee, at the standoff at Wounded Knee. That happened. He was central to Iran-Contra. He was central to the October surprise.
There's a hand in every pie, huh?
And you go all the way to the Epstein case, where he co-opted that case and became central to that too, and he's the bagman for the CIA. And I can I could tell everybody the story, and everybody's going to start knowing the story on Friday, and it's going to start blowing people's minds straight away. It's going to start causing people extreme trouble, because the fact is, if you go back in time, you can find where this all starts off. You can find where this is all going in the future, and you can see that the one person, that what's happening now is still controlled by a very limited number of people, and those people are selected by families, by organizations, by groups of people who allow these people a bubble that they can never be prosecuted. It came out in 1984 that Pottinger was central to arms smuggling in Iran-Contra, and what happened? Well, everybody else gets put on under the microscope, but he just disappears. Yeah. He's allowed to go and hide off. There's special interest for everybody in power, and it all runs along these lines. So this is why I find that every time I'm looking for where the power is today, I end up back in post-World War, where Pottinger and his father are sailing in 1958 from America to the Soviet Union, and then back to give talks about what life is like against the enemy. But what type of people in the peak of the Cold War go on a yacht trip with their son to the Soviet Union? It makes no sense. When you study history and when you look at the details, you start to see that the illusion, the grander illusion, isn't there. But that also then builds a picture of what the real situation looks like, and that's what again comes back to what your work does.
Yeah, but to your first point, generational, Leonard Cohen, he has a wonderful line in Jazz Police. It says that the Jazz Police is paid by Jean-Paul Getty. The jazzers are paid by Jean-Paul Getty too. Now the interesting thing here is that he was a complete rebel vis-a-vis his father, right? It's this old mummy of a puppet master, and then oligarch, and then there's the hippie rebel. I think that phenomena is true also, that some of these new I want you make a judgment call on the examples you made, but it is a fact that many of the revolutions, for example, were spearheaded by people who actually came from that class that they were revolting against, right?
This is why I hold judgment. I hold judgment on, and it has to be in everybody's actions. You have to examine their actions more closely.
Yeah. And maybe some psychology too, and also, I couldn't stand the people who said that Assange, he was a psyop, or what a poor psyop when he's suffering in jail. And you have to go by actions and things like that.
Agreed.
But my point was just that there's a reason often these generation, they produce rebels among their own. There's two reasons to that. Number one, first of all, when the plebs, the masses, the 99% have enough to get food in their belly and roof over their head, you can't expect the best poetry and art and thinkers necessarily rising from that. But the second is the fact that they have often rotten to the core parents. We kind of touched that when I interviewed you. And if they have some humanity in them, if that's not completely screwed out of them, then they will rebel. And I think you actually told me, I don't know if it was on or off air, but you said something about they may have 5-6 children, right? And there will be one there that is redempted, but then there will also be that one that inherits the psychopathy, and that's the one who's going to be spearheaded for the next generation of screw-us. So you have that phenomenon. But the big point you made, CIA and the intelligence networks, look, you just have to completely change the way you regard this. Per today, you have to regard the CIA, which is the best example of these things and probably the most powerful. You have to regard them as a cult, because that's what they are. They are a cult. And there's 2 layers to it. There's 3 layers to it. First, you have the exoteric public CIA, the information gatherers. I don't even mind them if they stick to gathering information and giving it to whoever is in power, because that's their job. And it's not necessarily an inherent bad thing for a country or any organization really to have intelligence gatherers. Where it's starting to go wrong is when they think they can and have the right to engineer society. That's the black ops, the activist arm of it. And so you have the public one, which is just completely tools. Then you have 99% of the workers who are, even whether it's in the intelligence gathering or the activist arm, who are brainwashed. They are lured in and they become a part of this ideology. It's like, study it's like any cult. I have a great book from the 70s. It's actually called CIA and the Cult of Intelligence. Mm-hmm. And there I see people interviewed on big shows like Joe Rogan and what are they called? There's many shows like that. And, we have an ex-CIA man or a CIA man, and they are it's like speaking with a Jehovah's Witness or anything. They really think they are doing a good thing, most of them.
Yeah, yeah.
But then you have those who uses this network, this tool, to shape their agenda. That's the third layer. And they have no identification with. They are not drinking their own. They are making the Kool-Aid. They're not drinking it, right? Mm-hmm. But they are already having another incentive, which is whatever perverse, transhumanist, power-desiring, political, geopolitical shaping inclination they have. It's a raw power. We need to manifest this raw power in today's society. This tool is one of the most important. And from CIA, it goes back to further down in the minion chain to mainstream media, etc. And so I don't think people who, I mean, one thing is, what's this big guy in CNN, this gay guy who is
Don Lemon?
Oh,
right. Oh, yeah. The weird albino. No, oh God, man! Every time I try and remember a name,
but he's an example of a new generation who's completely carrying the water for the forebears, right? So I think we should distinguish a little there. But no, this is how it's structured today. So if we can analyze and understand better the power players moving around today. Now we're talking about, by the way, we're talking about power tools. Power players, especially on a geopolitical global scale. Then we're starting to, more than ever in history, I think, have to look behind the scenes. There's never been so many puppet masters as today.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? And I think that's a sign that the cycle of revolution is coming to its head on the one side and about to start up again. The literal head, the decapitated head of this cycle is coming to a point where the people who are on the bottom looking up see a lot of these people who are enjoying themselves right now, but soon they're going to be down in the bottom, and there's going to be a very small amount of people on top who are going to get it very suddenly. And I've talked about this like the real how it is now. I think you've described it really well in saying that, you know, the turn of the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, you had this new type of power play that was a long-term game, and that means that the 0.3% who are right at the top, the people who are the biggest, richest, have kept power for a long time without us even realizing probably what their names are. And we kind of see the ones slightly underneath and we go, oh, look at them, they're the ones. But really we know there's a murky really far up. But the rest of society, the society who doesn't understand how this is all made up and who's on top and who's on bottom, they see the top 3% as being the enemy, and the top 3% are just doing whatever they can with a promise of being able to get up to that top bit at the end. And they're the ones who are always sacrificed at the end of this cycle.
Yes.
And then the new 3% and the people at top are still in power. And it's being able to identify and remove the top player of this cycle is potentially, I think capitalism, communism, all of it it can only ever be, any of these isms can only ever be viable if you're skimming up to the top constantly. If you're the ones who are on top, there's a mechanism to just make them go back into the fold automatically, and there's a cycle to it. That's the only way that it could possibly become a place where we don't have this authoritarian rule from a very rich that we don't even understand really exist. So that's what a lot of, I mean, that's where my work and a lot of what you speak about starts to connect together, because I really find it interesting to see who's truly in control and truly has the power. So who are the most powerful people on earth, in your opinion, from the information and the people you've talked to? Who do you think are the ones that you can actually use their name?
Very interesting and important point you're making here. First of all, I think those who are lesser known, even if they, because there's still power factions, and it's like we discussed on my show, it's like the mafia situation, right? Yes, there are in-warring factions, but if they have an outer enemy, they band together to crush it. So obviously, if, for example, RFK would win and he knows how to take on corruption and clean up the system and divide the oligarchs from the public tools that they need to have their claws on and suck dry, that's going to be someone all of them will band together against, even if they are having in fighting. But I think per definition, Bill Gates, for example, cannot be as dangerous as an oligarch, as a power player, than, say, a network that people don't even in general know exist. Because just not being on the radar of anyone, per definition, makes you more dangerous. Because it's like money, right? You can say, who is the richest guy? You know what, Johnny? It doesn't matter when you come up to a certain amount of trillions, because just having like 100 billion, you can never spend that money in your lifetime. Even if you tried, every day you went out and shopped and whatever, you can't spend it. It doesn't matter. The only reason they want all those money isn't for themselves. You reach, I don't know, 1 billion and there's nothing more you can achieve. They wanted to control the rest of the world. That's why they need that money, to flush it back into the world and shape the world by giving incentives here and bribing there, and so therefore, in the same vein, it's the same with power. When you have a certain amount, if you have enough power that you can kill anyone you want and get away with it, it doesn't matter if you're number 3 or number 5 in that list. But if nobody knows about you, except, of course, other players, then that gives you an extra layer of dangerousness. And I will name some. But I would just want to pose a question before I start naming names. David Rothkopf, he wrote in his book, The Superclass, that there's about 300 families and 6,000 individuals in this super elite. So we can identify them sociologically, but how much do you think? Because we were talking about how ideology and ideas has been hijacked and is not anymore after the reset from 45 and onwards, and organizations and networks. But the elite remains, they linger on. But among the elite, there was also certain ideas that was prevailing in the old world order. And it's still in the one we're in now. And it's probably also in the one we're going into. So I would ask you, Johnny, how much do you think the elites are ruled by that, and not just brute power and greed and whatever, and psychopathy? Like, for example, transhumanism is obviously an ideology. So do you think they have kept their ideological agenda?
That's really that I think comes within. You said earlier that the CIA has got to be viewed as a cult, and I think this level of the elite have to be viewed in the same way. And we see lots of like evidence of it. We see lots of clues to it, like an eyes wide shut sort of like finger pointing straight at this superclass that exists. And they've obviously got traditions that we probably don't even know exist, and organizations that we don't even know exist. And when if you hear and you believe, and I do believe some of the stories I've heard about people who are kids who have been trafficked into these sort of areas and their experience, it's like these people are just completely lacking in empathy. And it makes me wonder, it makes lots of people who are spiritual and who are religious wonder if there's some form of beast, if they're down with evil, if they're satanic or whatnot. It makes me wonder if these powerful classes, it's survival of the most narcissistic, and that the narcissistic genes have just kept replicating and floating to the top of the ruling class, and they're in their own little cycle, in their own little bubble, and that bubble probably allows them to build up some form of their own cultural or idea of what their culture is, what their cult is, what their beliefs are, how they separate from the people below. For us, we're looking up at these people, we're going, damn these people, and they know we're doing that and they love it. So the feeding of becoming the more powerful part of it, and they love that, and it get more powerful, they view us as more powerful, and then it makes them often, I think, want to see things happen. And this isn't, again, in testimony given by people who've been in those sort of circles and seen really dark stuff, have said, it's the worst things are happening behind closed doors. So they've got to have their own ethos, they've got to have their own, they've got their own culture. We don't understand it. It's separated from us, and it's separated by
it's a cultural breakaway civilization.
Yeah, it's a form of counterculture that has all of the power because of the way that money works and wealth works, and that the more narcissistic amongst us and the more power hungry amongst us, of course, want the most wealth, and so proactively go after it. While a lot of people, I mean, the real accusation to be had is, why do these people exist? Well, why isn't there a barrier to that? Why isn't there, as soon as people get that rich, a load of people who say, oh my God, that is unhealthy, we can't see a lot of these super rich, we can't see a load of them, so why don't we react like that? And it's because a lot of people just don't want trouble in their lives.
We only see an image of them, we never see anything real about them.
But even in the image, it's like they're like, that's too much for me to handle. It's so detached from my own reality. My reality of being able to look at my bank account, see if I can actually be able to afford to eat tonight. That reality is so far removed from their reality. They don't have any of those troubles.
No. And Alex Jones, the canary in the coal mine for podcasters, he makes actually a good point that he's been making ever since I knew he came on my radar, and that's that the elites are bored. When you can do anything, have anything, you start developing like a psychopathical mind, because it was never meant, no human being can handle it. The old saying, power corrupts and ultimate power corrupts ultimately. So nobody can really, very few, you have to be like a Jesus level to be, and they don't want that, right? To be able to withstand the temptations and the sadism that just comes from a empty, because they don't have real values. You love your kid, right? Someone loves their church or whatever. We find things that make life meaningful for us, and these are usually at best, at least they're harmless things. They may even be beneficial things. That's the normal culture in all the world since dawn of mankind. But these people have only a vacuum, and it needs, and it's like you pour in power, but they can never satisfy them, and so they have to develop narcissism and psychopathy. But let alone that, what about, like Whitney has uncovered, and you too, that, and many others, that these pedophile games and stuff is often also as is a tool. Also, it's not just a culture; it's also a tool, right, to maybe lure the 3%ers into, so they can get a gridlock on them. So the question is, how much is this a real culture and how much is it just a play?
And okay, if we're gonna go, if we're gonna accept that my audience and the people who listen to you can handle a thought that's really dark, I think that we are misunderstanding a lot of it. I think that the majority of people who go to get seduced by sex games, elite sex stuff, the majority of them get seduced by beautiful ladies who are what we would call in Britain on the game, who are really just like selling sex for money, and who are have a two-way relationship
And
and
had their first menstruation.
yes, yes. The majority of them are adults,
Mm.
human adults over the age of 18.
Mm.
And there's another group of people, and people like Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell are those people. These are the sadistic preferential pedophiles, as the FBI would profile them as. And I don't think people can really understand what these people are doing and how these people live. When you're talking about how, you can pour as much emotion and emotional content to a real low down narcissist, and it just doesn't have any emotional output, won't come. You're just wasting. It's just buffer. With these people, it was like they're feeding these people and pedophiles and pedophile elites feed off these children's energy in a way that seems religious, definitely cultish, that they need to feel a certain level of controllable fear, that they can turn the fear up and down and they stay within a range. They like a certain range. They have a profile. Epstein has a very significant profile. Only breaks every now and again, and those breaks are times where you have to examine the person who's saying the statements of what happened if they don't match his profile, because his profile is very, very narrow. It's very unique. He liked girls between the ages of, it seems, 13 to about 17. 18 was too old. Over 20 was just way too old.
Which is why it was unrequited love with Ghislaine.
Yeah, and Ghislaine loved she loved to but unrequited love, but it was a different type of love. She could do something for him, and she realized how powerful he would remain and how much of a good fixer and how many connections. He was like the person you could ride on the back, and they can maintain a relationship that looks loving, appears to be like a mature adult relationship between two people, but the relationship wasn't really unrequited love. There was two-way love. It was a different type of love. It was a love of being able to supply the thing that they loved from each other. And what that was...
God, he must have reminded her so of her father.
Yeah. Oh,
sounds
yes.
like a substitute there.
Completely. And she was, if you look at how her father punished her, it was like, choose the whip. Do you want the cat of nine tails, or do you want the horse whip, or whatever? Wow. That's what you're going to be punished by. Everything's sexual and weird once you enter into the Maxwell family back then, when Robert Maxwell was the head of household, really lacking in empathy. It seems like the whole clan had this like extreme narcissistic personality disorder. Every single one of them was just really on the spectrum of like really, really fierce, unable to detach emotionally from the rest of humanity and say, we are superior. Our family itself are superior to everybody. And that let Ghislaine function for Epstein in a way that was like, she would bring girls to him, and then she would stand in the doorway, and when the girls realized what was happening, and he's unveiled his penis on the massage table, the girls would turn around and find Ghislaine Maxwell standing at the door. Now, at that moment, he's about to get what he wants, and he gets the kick that he wants to, and the kick is to feel that girl's fear and to feel that she doesn't want to be with him, and that he is going to go for a process that means that she will then accept disrupt him and do something that's extremely personal for him. And that's like a weird psychopathy of like, and then he would also, like the way he talked to these girls, he would also project out this kindness, caring, all of this sort of stuff. So he would reform their relationship from this one of fear into one of a kind, loving father figure who's there for them, you know. And that's how he worked. That gave him power, but the fear had to be there, and the fear was created by people like Ghislaine Maxwell and these girls not having an escape and turning around and discovering that there was a woman there who she was also feeding off a different type of energy, a sexual energy. She was very unrequited love. No, she wasn't into Epstein. She was into girls roughly between the age of 13 and 17. She was into exactly the same. I still believe, and I still believe that I tracked her down when she was in hiding sharing child porn. I still believe it. The actual, I found this user. It was organized. It was just like, so if you study what pedophiles are like, they're so organized with everything, like the preferential.
I mean, they have to be, otherwise they end up in jail.
Well, no, because I'm getting it. What I'm saying is wrong, because the situational pedophiles will be messy and they end up in jail.
Yeah.
So the preferential pedophiles are organized. They organize their videos, rename them, do all of that. So when they're sharing them online, this one was sharing. It was Gil, GHISL was the username, and it was coming from the IP address was going through a server room in Canada that was from a company that was. The chairman located at that very building was Brian Mulroney, who used to be the Prime Minister of Canada and was close friends with Robert Maxwell. And it was just like, oh my God, it's so obvious. And it's the age range. It's the 14 to 18 sort of like age range. They both were, they were the same creature. They loved the fear. They loved to get that fear. When that girl turned around, Ghislaine Maxwell would be getting off tonight. She'd be able to get off tonight at the thought of the fear and the pain and all of that power she's got over somebody else. And she loved to have power, you know. She used sex as a tool, but I don't think people would see like, oh, it's not like she used sex to orgasm. She used sex as a powerful tool.
Rape is always about power.
Yeah. And then the rest is like, I'm not sure Ghislaine Maxwell would ever have been able to come. I think nothing would ever be able to, well, probably some things, but nothing that we can think of could possibly reach what she had and what she needed to get off, and what she needed to get off and release was the pain of other people, and to feed off that pain. That makes them a very like interesting, like they had a really symbiotic relationship. It was really clear. So I don't believe that it was one side or the other. No. It's amazing to study, because it made like that combination of the two made this different relationship that you very rarely see. This extremely powerful, extremely rich pedophile child trafficker at the center of the intelligence networks of the world. There's going to be stories that come from their activities that we still don't know about, coming for decades and decades, maybe hundreds of years to come. They'll be still mapping out that how sick that relationship was, and it's a drama.
Yeah, and I'm also convinced you were onto her. But let's use this as a case study then, because we were talking about the bigger picture, and this is a prime example of how some of these players get their psychology formation, and sexuality and psychology goes hand in hand. So you can pull a Wilhelm Reich on me anytime. He wrote the book or the orgasm function of the orgasm, where he proved how fascism, one of the psychological components to fascism, is impotence and frigidity. And you block the life energy, basically, so you can't express it. That's why the hippie movement had to have the opposite manifestation of fascism, because the free sex, everybody, we don't care about any borders or limits, right? Completely chaos. So this goes hand in hand. But back to the and how much is culture, how much is psychology, how much is a tool. It's probably a big mesh. It's the same as us, right? We can't divorce ourselves entirely from the information. It becomes a unit. Same with them. They take what they have, this culture, this psychology, and they make honey traps out of it, etc. Although Whitney makes a good point these days. She says that we don't really need an Epstein anymore because of the technological development is so advanced. So now we can afford losing the old schoolers like the function he had. But naming names.
Yes, yes, yes. I was
right?
about to say that myself. That's the sentence that was going through my mind. So go on.
And
Name.
unfortunately,
You promised me, Al. You promised me. You name me some names. Tell me my names. If you tell me my father's name, I'll be like, no, it's not true. No. Anyway, go on.
I will sign my death warrant right now.
Okay.
But we'd only have time for one faction I want to describe for you. One overlooked faction. I'm not saying it's the only one. I'm not saying it's necessarily number one. But here's a scenario for you. 1945. You get a lot of powerful people coming out of the Axis. You get the entire spy networks of, for example, Galen. Not just Galen himself survives and is rehabilitated, but his entire spy network. The Soviet desk under Galen is direct. He reports directly to the president. So we have the Nazi chief and spy directly reporting to the American president, only with Nazi figures all over the Soviet bloc. And in the West, he becomes the head of a mixture of the old schoolers. I don't even mind the precursor to the CIA, those who were during the war. Many of them did a good job, both on the British side and American side.
Yeah, agreed.
Although they were ruled by psychopaths, for example, the brothers, the brothers in America,
John Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles.
The Dulles. But here's the thing I want to say before I go on. There was fascism didn't come from, we can't just blame Germany here. They just got one type of fascism that became a loose cannon and divorced themselves from the elites. The elites will always need fascism to keep. It's like this last security control, although history repeats itself and they make wild Frankensteins that like rabid dogs comes and bites there in the ass like Hitler did. But the thing is, there was a Wall Street fascism in the 30s that was fighting against FDR, and I am convinced FDR was killed by these people. I haven't found an expert yet that I can have a show about it, but even back in the day, people were talking about this. So after they got rid of FDR is when they really managed to seize control over the American machine. Now, there was a setback with JFK, but we all saw how that went. After JFK, they even controlled the presidents directly. I'm not saying that the presidents after the war was in, but one of them tried to warn us. He saw what was in the works. So about the military-industrial complex, which is another name for this. But anyway, we have the Galen. Then we have brilliant scientists who were on the verge of discovering super interesting stuff. I mean, and they went, the Nazis had no qualms of what they were researching, which is why they succeeded. They had no moral qualms. They had no monetary qualms. They just went all out. Whether it was like, let's sew a head on an animal. I mean, they would do anything. And they discovered crazy stuff. In fact, I have had people on my show who's more or less proven that the Manhattan Project couldn't be completed if it wasn't for the fact that we got some very essential stuff from the Nazis at the end there. Because they were really on the verge of, in fact, they had already demonstrated the atom bomb in this in Poland, they had this facility, but they didn't have time to mass distribute it. So Hitler was waiting for in vain for these Wunderwaffe. So we have these brilliant scientists, all of them rehabilitated, all of them shipped over to the West with a raise in salary and complete freedom, and we're working together. And most of them took over NASA. So CIA, flushed Nazi spies into CIA. So far, we know there's spy networks unchecked. There's led by Nazis. There's scientists unchecked, led by Nazis. Third component, money. Fascism is nothing if it's not a marriage between corporation and state. Now, the difference is that today the corporation control the states. Back in the day, the state controlled the corporations, at least Hitler did.
Mm-hmm.
And here we have Bormann setting up 750 corporations that has one goal, and that's to become global, to become really global cartels. Tons of money already before the war. We know the names of these people. It's the Acorns. It's the guy who sponsored Hitler. Farben guy. All these people. I'm just blanking on the names. So they survive, and in addition to this, all the Nazi loot, all the money is shipped off. They make a deal. They have a crisis meeting in 1943 because the Nazis saw which way the wind was blowing. Even if Hitler was a maniac and refused to realize that, his number twos and threes were all about, dog eat dog and coming out on top. So they had this conference. I forgot the name of it, but it's mainstream history. And they planned how to, worst case scenario, ship all the values out. Even the Nazi gold couldn't, make up so many movies and novels if it wasn't for the fact that it got away. So we have untold, I think by the measure that Ladislav Farago gives and Paul Manning back in the day, great journalists who did a lot on this. I think they are, what is the number? I think it's like 50 billion, which is a lot in 45.
Oh, so yeah.
We have untold money. We have untold money networks. We have banks being set up, interestingly, merging with Jewish banks eventually. But so we have banks, corporations, scientists, spy networks. Now, all this could in one scenario, only mean that, okay, a lot of bad people flushed the American system and changed the values of the land of the brave and free, right? But it's worse than that, Johnny. That's what I'm posing. It's worse than that, because it's not just that they were integrated into the system. It's also one central factor that we have to remember. All of them were still loyal to a central axis power player. And his name was Martin Bormann, Hitler's number two. He survived the war. There can be no question about it. I have had several shows about it, and it's going to eventually become into mainstream history as accepted. And we have evidence, circumstantial evidence to be sure, that they were still reporting to him. So we have all this power, and they are loyal to an extraterritorial power player. Now, this isn't a very big pill to swallow, because there's so much good research about it. But here's where people start getting irrational. Bormann, for sure, is out of the picture by 1970, around there. Do you think all these people with those values, many of them still like rabid anti-Semites and racists and, whatnot, but what I mean to say, they're still old school Nazis, not like our Nazis today who have rainbow flags, right? Who have changed the values, but the mechanism is still there. So do you think they are just taking their ball and going home when Bormann dies? Obviously, they are continuing, especially because they've been on this growth. So who is taking over the control? That's the big question. It may not just be an individual, it can be a board. And my point, Johnny, is that this is one huge power player that has been overlooked by many, not all. They're still, like you have the Lyndon LaRouche organization, have been wonderful in uncovering these things. So this power player, I believe, is still in play, but I don't think their sons and their grandchildren are necessarily anti-Semite or hate gays, etc. I don't think they care about those things anymore, but they are fascist to their bone.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's something when you're talking about how these people they have their ideologies and they get defeated at war. And America was this, I've just tried to describe it to people like the view of it was a soulless behemoth, like this massive, it was a monster machine. And it didn't have a face. It didn't have the same culture as the Russians and their
No
enemies
flag to
had.
blame.
Yeah, no, but they wanted to. I think they were really, the Americans were really good at saying, where did our enemies go right during war? And while they're fighting them, where do our enemies go right? And how can we adapt to that? And a lot of what we've seen America turn into is because they've adapted the some of the most successful parts of the Nazi war machine, of the
No,
Leninist
here's where I
propaganda
disagree.
machine.
Yeah,
Go
here's
on.
where I disagree with you. Although, of course, you're right, they have done this, but this is like what I would say the mainstream interpretation of this phenomenon.
Mm.
What I'm posing is worse. What I'm saying is that those who managed to gain control and hijack the American ship were already Nazis in the 30s. They were our Anglo-American Nazis. They were, and there's many families, but those are a super example.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't Hitler Nazis. They were fascists.
Yeah. I get you.
Right.
I get you.
So, but Hitler was too exotic and unhinged for them. They still want and now we live in end stage capitalism, and now it's all unraveling. But back then, capitalism still was a viable option that many believed in. Now, these people were corporatists. They didn't want free market. They wanted to shape and take over the money machine. And by the way, these people are behind most of the terrorism that we saw after the war. They used old school Nazis like Otto, what's his name again? They used old school Nazis in the field even, to unleash bombs, to talk with. They went to many Arabian states. They went into Asia. So they were involved in coups. They were behind. They took. I mean, in your part of the world, I'm saying South America now. They were, the Salvador Allende coup, many of these, because their power base, although it was international and extraterritorial, most of them were seated in Argentina, but also a little Paraguay, also a little Brazil. But in these areas, they were placed physically, some of those power players, but they were sponsoring terrorism all over the globe. And in at least 10 years after the war, they were fighting against Israel. Until, according to Manning, they made a peace offer and they made a deal.
What year did this peace offer happen? Do you remember?
I forgot, but I think it's in the 50s sometime. Okay. No, we can find out when, because a part of this deal was that the last guy Israel was allowed to go after, and Simon Wiesenthal, the Nazi hunter, was complaining about this. But the last guy Mossad was allowed to take down was the Jewish camp guy, the guy they abducted from Argentina and put on trial in Israel.
No, I can't. Wait,
the guy who was behind the camps, allegedly. The guy who was, I'm blanking on names today. Haven't had enough sleep. So, but after that guy, Adolf Eichmann.
Oh, right,
right. So we know, we can just look up when this was. After that, there was a peace deal, and I think it was a practical one, because by this time, Israel wasn't a socialist experiment anymore. It had already started to develop into an apartheid fascist state. So it's in their interest too to become a part of the huge players. And they had many banks on board and many interest groups. They were wielding their own power. So why should the Nazis and the Zionists exhaust themselves and eradicate each other and then let the other power player rise, right? So let's make a peace deal. Like, everybody, look, when we come to this level of power, everybody are pragmatic, okay? And when you don't have rabid believers like Hitler around anymore, or he wasn't even the one who conceived of these ideas. He had people who conceived it, but he certainly believed in most of them. But these people were gone. Bormann was a pragmatician. he probably didn't believe in anything, not even the Nazi occultism. He was probably an atheist. So these are the people we're talking about. Now, I wanna ask you a question that's related partly to this, but partly to what we talked about, because you were saying about the psychopathy that also these people have, and the narcissism and all this stuff. Now, there's one word for that, and that's evil. That's what human beings have been calling this since the dawn of mankind, whatever you conceive evil to be. And you're saying there may be religious or philosophical or spiritual implications here. And we know for sure that among the Nazis there is. But then you must remember that pedophilia and brutality and all this stuff, torture, has been it is being used everywhere and anywhere. As long as people come together and an organization or a power structure becomes big enough, it manifests like the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church isn't created to do this, but it's being seized and taken over. So I'm thinking, and here's my question for you, that if there is demonic forces, quote unquote, it may not just be that some people dress up and meet and are open about, like, I admire this, because you, like I say, you find the same thing in people who pretend to be good guys. I'm thinking, what if there's real forces behind the scenes who doesn't care what mask you take on when you worship this? You can take on the halo of the saints and still do this, because if you can entertain this idea, then we can start to discuss the 3D, the 4D version of this, because we live in a time now where you have to integrate these things. Just look at the UFO phenomenon. There are paranormal aspects to that too. And there are indeed people who believe that these aren't necessarily human beings or biological creatures coming all the way from another planet, but that they're, for example, you have one interesting theory I want to plague you with, and that's that when the first nuclear weapons went off, there was like a rift, a dimensional hole being created where there was spillover. So these are some monkey wrenches I wanted to throw in to see what you think about these things, because I've never heard you speak about anything like this.
There's a load there in there. There's a load to respond to and a load to talk about. And you're right. You're going right far back. You're right about Hitler not having any of the nonsense of capitalism messing around with his system. In actual fact, I think it was Alan Dulles and another guy, I can't remember who he was, but what his name is, but he was really responsible for making youth programs that were attached to the CIA and CFR after the war. They were lawyers who went in before the war in 1930s Germany to argue for a load of bonds to be returned, billions and billions of pounds worth of bonds that had been confiscated by the fascists for some ideological reasons. And of course, they were willing to play the games. These people were willing to play the games, and they were willing to be on their side. And there was so much that so much that was there to respond to. I'm just trying to get my mind around it, because that whole period is just so full. It's really important time. And when you're talking about like what happened afterwards and what happened after the Second World War, and this really simplistic idea that Hitler's burnt bodies there and the war is over, I do find that idiotic. And there's been an effort over the past 30, 40, 50 years to make Nazis just skinheads who will attack you for no reason. And that's a concerted effort through every medium that you can imagine, and is eventually manifests in reality as groups who act like that, but are not real Nazis, because the real Nazis are the businessmen, the people who know what they're doing. And as you know, they escaped. There was obviously there's a massive German population down in South America that popped up after World War II. And Eichmann, I had a look, it was 1960. These periods are all so massively important in this like sort of
that jives with when Israel went completely off the rails.
Yeah, well, there's a period between there. I think that Israel go off the rails at this point because and okay, let's go. Can you remember Israel going off the rails so I can get back to that point if I don't get there myself and I go I can't remember what I'm saying. Right, you go back to the beginning of the war, and there's a loads of stuff happening, and there's a load of formations of loads of new organizations, such as the CIA, which is forming from units such as the OSS, and then you got like the British are kind of working against American intelligence at this point. When the war ends, all of their money is like, oh, we can allocate to try this new propaganda here, or try and sway their focus over here, and that's what they were trying to do. An American war machine had been created, and the British were trying to learn how to manipulate it with fake information. And you know what happened during this time, the creation of these intelligence agencies by these people who thought they were the best. They thought they had experienced the most and they knew better, but the sides hadn't been formed quite the same. When you were talking about FDR, yeah, FDR, when FDR was, however his end was met, he was a problem, really, along with the person who was originally, I believe, in the race against the primaries for Truman, with Truman to take over eventually, who ended up being like a lot of his supporters were locked out of the hustings or whatever you call it over there.
Yeah, but just remember one thing about FDR. He was killed a few days. That's just a few days before he died. And Hitler suicide, which is very convenient if the intel agencies wanted to save Bormann and or Hitler.
Well, I think there was a whole new thing about to happen, and it was they needed to. I mean, really, when you talk about fourth dimension, really, that's when we start to see fifth dimensional warfare, or fifth generation warfare, sorry, come into it. Like we see this new sort of a rise of this sort of fake news narrative, the American intelligence agencies using Leninist style propaganda, but making you believe it's true rather than saying it's propaganda.
Much better than Soviet. This is
they were refined. It was refined.
This is Goebbels on steroids.
Yeah. So they were taking all of these parts, they were incorporating them into their system, but they were becoming their system. Now, I'm trying to understand how I can explain to you what is on my mind, because when I researched the formation of the German Marshall Fund in 1973, which in Harvard, which went on to which houses the Alliance for Secure Democracy and the neocons at the moment, but has also been responsible for loads of training programs and is basically a CIA funded unit that was I mean, the people who were original on the honorary board and the actual board of this German Marshall Fund were like David Rockefeller and John McCloy and some of the people who were considered like the heads of the New World Order and
Usual
the
suspects.
CIA, CFI, yeah, the big guys. All of them had something to do with it, and it was funded by the German government for the American and the American intelligence units to focus on inserting policy in Eastern Europe. So the Germans were just funding the American intelligence services to do this. And at the time when I was researching that, I felt, right, okay, well, that's obvious. You want something done and you can't do it yourself because it could spark a war. That's what you could say. So that's why they're doing it. But otherwise, they could just do it in a multitude of other ways. Why would they go to the Americans? And that's because the Americans are very much aligned with them by this time. By 1973, they're in together. The Germans, I love them. I've met loads of them throughout my life. They're the most industrious people possibly on earth. I will say that they are. I mean, they know how to create not only an empire or philosophy or art. They are magnificent people who are very skilled at understanding how other countries work and are very powerful. Power that you know it's gone through age after age after age. The Germanic people are really impressive, and they're not going to die away anytime soon after the war. And we were fed that nonsense. But the Germans have taken control in a policy of funding intelligence programs, of doing a load of different things that would suggest that they have been in control to some sort of extent all along, but in a more subversive way than what we saw with the Nazis, because the actual official Hitler and the Nazis. I think that you're right. The Nazi ideology has moved on. I'm currently in Cardiff, but I was in Chile for 6 months recently, and when you get right down to the south of the country, you see loads of blonde hair, blue eye Aryan families everywhere. They keep themselves to themselves. They have entirely their own infrastructure going on. The Germans, when they settled in America, did the same thing as well. Villages became towns, and they were just all German. They're very good.
Even the names, Germantown, isn't that a place?
Yeah, and you can you can hide away as a German. You can hide away very well, because people are like, oh, they're Germans, but they keep themselves to themselves. And I think that happens a lot in South America, because there's a lot of this. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a secondary structure that's still organizing.
It used to be, at least.
Yeah,
Up
it
until the 70s. Up until the 70s.
I mean, these, yeah.
Like Colonia Dignidades, and one example, there's these colonies.
Yeah.
Let me just interject before you go on, that I don't think it's about ethnicity, although at some point in history, of course, Germany was a good hub for these demonic forces. But it's this ideology that infiltrates huge institutions like NASA, CIA, Bilderberger, NATO, even the German state itself after the war were run by old school Nazis. And when you ask why America, Leonard Cohen answers it. He says, it's here they got the range and the machinery of change.
Yeah, most
Anyway,
definitely.
Go on with your reasoning.
Well, there's a couple of Germans have been really, really responsible for lots of Willy Munzenberg. He was the one who invented Comintern and a lot, and he was German, and he used to have running battles with the fascists and others on the streets. But he created something that was really, really the future of what the CIA would progress into. Nahum Goldman, who would be one of the founding fathers of Israel, he was working for German intelligence in 1917, 1918, up until 1920s, when eventually when the Nazis happened, he moved to Switzerland, and he claims to have fled to America, and then he became the central, he was all through that time the central figure in the creation of Israel and the walk towards Zionism. Well, they all got these German roots that are so, really interesting, not just little German roots. I mean, working for German intelligence once upon a time. And it, some of the dynamics that have happened over the past 100 years are just international manifestation of inter-German rivalry. So like ideological rivalry inside Germany and German.
No, you're so right, because even the Jews, the worst power players among Jewish people are Germans.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Yiddish Jews that really has, it's not the tribe of Mizraim, it's not the Sephardics. It's these German, Central European Jews that are a part of the power player too. So it's very interesting how that culture has shaped power players.
I think Germany in general is obviously the driving force, like a beating heart, and so's Russia. You've got these really important powers that are really close to each other, and Germany fears their power being taken away and looks to America to protect it somewhat. That's the idea that's given out. But really, Germany is one of the most powerful countries throughout history. Well, it will remain being powerful.
Up until recently, at least.
Well, right, I don't think... I think that there's still, if you look at how they are placed economically, and for the future and where their country is, they're still a major player in directing Europe. There's no one bigger than them. They're the ones who are deciding, and they didn't have that sort of power before the Second World War. They had to fight and lobby, and everybody would be against them because they were against that side or whatnot.
EU is a Nazi project. Let's not
Yes,
forget that.
exactly. And when I was talking about Nahum Goldman, well, Nahum Goldman was given his own office on the creation of the United Nations, and given his own office inside the United Nations to start for the creation of lobbying for the creation of Israel. It's like an insider's job. All of these networks and these organizations have all been created to dominate. Of course, I did the work on Kissinger's International Seminar, and the GMF, the German Marshall Fund I just talked about, was really in Harvard, was the same person who was actually running it on behalf of the people. This one woman, her name escapes me, Abby Collins, who used to be Kissinger's right-hand woman at Kissinger's International Seminar, ends up running Guido Goldman's German Marshall Fund programs as well, that would teach leadership, to train up leadership candidates, potential leadership candidates, and all these people are being selected, put into roles, and they're being selected and put into roles by people like Henry Kissinger, who was born in Germany, through the German Marshall Fund that's being funded by Germany, all because there's a battle against Germany and Russia over there. It doesn't seem that it's all anything is American in there. When you start to study it all, you start to look at it all, you say, well, okay, so Guido Goldman, Henry Kissinger's best mate, they're living together, they're making massive decisions, they're causing big movements in world politics. They're creating things, they're forming things, and they're two Germans hanging around in America, and it keeps coming up like this. There's these German influencers, Fritz Kramer being one of them, being massively important to loads of people, but inspiring Kissinger himself, like Kissinger fought under Fritz Kramer. So you've got like all of these really powerful Germans. He was the one. It wasn't Willy Munzenberg. But Fritz Kramer used to fight in the streets, used to have running battles in the streets. That was a quote about Fritz Kramer, running battles between the communists and the Nazis. He just used to get in the middle of it all. They would all be fighting, and Fritz Kramer would be in the middle, beating them all up. Germans are off there. It was an amazing melting pot for ideology as well, though.
But I think it mattered more in the old school where you were from, because people hadn't the great mobility as today when modern flights and all that. So that's, I think, why they produced for that time the power. Like I said, networks were physical back in the day, right? And the same is true in terms of nations today. America became a player after World War II for sure, because Wall Street, which I think, obviously Wall Street has always been an independent factor, but City of London was much more in charge. I5 or 6 or whatever you call it, was much more someone who called the shots. Today, I think the global elite, because they have no allegiance in terms of geography, they have no allegiance in terms of ethnicity or religion, but the global elites are using the American state more than anything, because I think America has to be brought down because of its charter, because of for all its faults. Mm-hmm. It's got very many good security measures for freedom. Mm-hmm. That you don't see that in Britain, for example. Britain technically could be, the Queen could come out of her chest right now and say, look, I'm taking over everything. And nobody could do anything about it.
I agree completely. There's like the British could be under the cosh really easily, but the the Americans, I mean, that's everything. That's the placement of where the territory is in relation to every other territory around the earth. It's so much harder at the moment with current technology to take out America. And America, like you say, safeguards, but the safeguards, you can see them openly trying to deplete them. So gun ownership is definitely one of those things. I used to believe I was on the left because I didn't know where I was, and someone told me I was on the left
Back
once upon a
back
time.
back when left
And
right made sense, right?
yeah, when you thought left right made sense. But I realized very quickly that if people don't have guns in America, they will be taken over. That's
And
it.
your friend Kissinger, when he was involved in going off the gold standard and introducing the petrodollar, America as a state has nothing to earn by that. But we have this wonderful tool now. We can use it for our international power games, which is unraveling these days, coincidentally. But it worked. It was they had their go, right, for 50 years or how much it's been. So no, I just think they take over these institutions to use them, to wield them as power tools or on behest of themselves. And you were going to say Israel off the rails.
Oh, I can't remember. It's
You
off
asked
the
me to
rails.
remind you, but anyways.
Oh no, we forgot. Oh, no, the end of the line, I suppose is, you see, is it Israel going off the rails? You say 1960, 1961, 1962, that period where you start to see this heading towards what happens in 1967, and then like fundamentally that's it. Israel is created now. At that point, there was a fight, and that was all bundled up with Cold War sort of nuclear technology. That was all bundled up with the fact that it was the idea of perpetual warfare, of limited warfare, of mutually assured destruction. All of these ideas were come up with between 1957 and 1961, and that meant that in the 60s all of the plans changed around the world, and the Israelis had created the most flexible infrastructure because the state had only just been formed properly. They were the most flexible to dealing dynamically with a situation. So I think you've seen the birth of what was the start of the sea change of all of the direction of how people were going to have war against each other. Start with this Israel looking for the right answer very early on because they're scared of their own destruction, and that happens in the
when did they get their nuclear weapon? Do you remember? Was that in the 70s?
Yeah, I think it might be in the 70s, but I'm not even sure they had their nuclear weapons. I think that came later, and I'm still trying to put together some of that. I'm trying to understand. I don't want to misspeak on that because so far when it's come down to nuclear stuff, I've started to examine Pakistani nuclear program, the Indian nuclear program, a bit on the Chinese nuclear program, but not much, and then started to look at the other nuclear programs, because there's all of the people who were spearheading these programs seem to be attached to the same group that again includes people like Kissinger and stuff. Like Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was basically told by Kissinger out in public, you're going to get it if you head towards nuclear weapons, and then behind closed door he was helping him get nuclear weapons. And directly, you can see like Kissinger talking about it in memos and stuff, and it going against what they were saying publicly. It's a really interesting period where they were starting to feed this stuff into people. So I think it came to a point where it's mutually assured destruction, that sort of period. Once you've got like Herman Cahn's written on thermonuclear war, everybody's like, all right, then we're at the stalemate. It's like Tesla's death ray. If anybody presses a button, everything blows up. Stanley Kubrick shows it really well, and so the whole dynamics of everything change, which isn't a surprise why Kubrick. I think Dr. Strangelove was released in 1964, and I think that was an example of them seeing that everything's going crazy. You know, that was a projection saying, look how crazy all of it is. No one knows what they're doing. And so the Israelis were the first ones to respond. And it seems like they're going off the rails, but everybody was going off the rails, you know. And one thing I want to say as well about Truman, when he came into power, it's like all of the people who were behind the creation of the CIA and other really important parts of the intelligence apparatus were all warning against recognizing Israel as a state, and saying this is really dangerous. We'll be heading towards something really dangerous. But you know, those who
don't you think the exile Nazi power faction had something to do with that?
Yeah, they were sniffing. They already. And this is why I feel like there was someone like a sort of CFR style organization who would have been saying that's the focus. That's where. There is something else there. There's something else there that's unspoken within history. But Truman knew that he had to. He knew something that other people didn't know. It seemed they were going to support them, and even most of the people like Kermit Roosevelt and others who created the CIA didn't accept Israel as a state and didn't accept Zionist thinking until post 1967. And that's when, you know, you see it go. I think the 1960 Israel going off the rails is the bit in between there and there, where they realize they've got the support of everyone now. The United Nations, they got their own office. The Americans or the president is on board, and everybody will follow that direction from now on. The American intelligence service completely against you, but going to completely go in line with whatever you do now to try and keep the status quo, and are going to turn their back slowly on the Arabs, but act like they care about the Arabs loads and loads at the same time, because they really do. Fundamentally, they don't want to see Zionists take control of Israel, but they lose that battle. That gives the CIA the ability to look like they're trying to do the right thing.
I mean, the Nazis were propping up Arabian states. They directly. I mean. Actual Nazis who were rehabilitated and put in the Western system. I think there was a battle between the Zionist faction and the exile Nazi faction for control over America, and I think that battle. I don't think that battle exists anymore, because I think they have all developed. They come from, look, in one way, Zionism and National Socialism as philosophies have very many similar traits. We are the chosen people. I won't go into too many details because I don't want your show to be banned, taken down, shadow
don't
banned.
Worry. Yeah, but
the point is, when they develop and they lose more and more, like for example, on the Zionist side, most of the Zionists aren't even Jews today. There's powerful Zionists who are not Jews. So in the same way, this idea doesn't really need ethnicity or religion anymore. We live in a time where that has been transcended. It's still about class, the super class. It's still about power, wanting power and maintaining itself. And it's still about the families. But just like Nazis, the fascists don't really care about, we don't hate gays anymore. We can even have a gay guy in our power circle as long as he's completely on board with our agenda. In the same way, I think, so they develop from each their stance. And I think it's very easy for them eventually to fuse. Do you see what I mean? Because they have the same values. It's all fascism, man.
There is just a certain level of contradiction that they must overcome, and once they've overcome those slight, tiny contradictions, then everything else is much more powerful. It moves everything much more forward. I agree that there's been a few,
and those who cared most about those contradictions, most of them have died off by now.
But that's why I've come to the conclusion that when I see it's about linguistics. Again, it's about language. Yeah. When I was saying that America has taken on part. So they take their enemies on. So they take on Lenin and communism, and they get and they get to a point where they say, okay, we're going to use that Leninist propaganda in our own way, in a more subversive way, and we're going to turn it against them. And it works very well. And they take a bit of that, their enemy, and they adapt. And I say it simplistically like that, and I think that's for my own audience to understand what happened to America. But I don't think that I accept fully well. I don't think necessarily it's the entity, this entity or this idea of America and the American people or the American state knowingly taking on these parts. They were infiltrated by this thinking.
Yes.
So it's a two. There's not one way, because what they did was they enticed these people towards them. They brought them over to their country. They inserted them in
but you
their
have to look at who did that. Those who did that were already Nazis.
Yeah, I know. I understand that.
They tried a coup. They tried a coup against who was it? Yeah, it was against Roosevelt. They tried the business plot, and these are the people that this guy warns about in War is a Racket. Smedley Butler. He warns about this faction. They are already in the American side, and before they realized that Hitler was a wild dog who would bite them, they were actually even in Britain too. You had those guys, right? They tried to cooperate with Rudolf Hess to get rid of Churchill and put in the peace faction. So, and they were cooperating with generals on the Nazi side, where they tried a famous plot against Hitler that failed. So Churchill won in Britain and Hitler won in Germany. But there was, even during the war, even in the 40s, early 40s, there were cooperation or talks between a faction in Britain and a faction in Germany. So it was the more moderate Nazis were talking with the more fascistic Brits. And they had a counter in Wall Street, like Sullivan and Cromwell and all these people, the business plot people. So these are the people that hate Roosevelt, they hate Kennedy, they try to control Truman and the other guy before Kennedy. And these are the people who sanctioned Operation Paperclip and all this stuff. So it's kind of, they're not Germans, but they're all of the same mindset. And they are bringing in these moderates, the good Nazis, get rid of the more exotic stuff that Hitler represented. Unbeknownst to them, many of them, I think, is that the actual power part of the same ideology in Germany survived via Bormann. Because even if Hitler survived the war, he was sidelined. Bormann just needed him as an insurance card. But you can even believe Hitler died. The point is, it was a battle of who would control this huge conglomerate, this cartel of this tentacle. In James Bond, which is, written by a guy who was on the inside. So he knew what
I was just thinking his name while he was saying
octopus,
to me,
right? Or Specter. So octopus, because it has many arms to reach. And one point that Dr. Farrell, one of my favorite guests on this topic, makes is that the Nazis never, after the war, remember, unlike Japan, where everybody had to sign the surrender paper. In Germany, it was only the military and the state bureaucracy that signed. So the Nazi party never lost the war, never admitted any defeat or anything like that. So they went on and they had their own network going strong. And in the 60s, 70s, 80s, where so many different power players come together and fight for the soul. And most of it is behind the scenes, because you have this capitalism, which is just, it's mother corporations, daughter, everything is corporations. Now we live in end stage capitalism. Now we live in corporatism. They have seized what's left of the free market. They have co-opted socialism. There's nothing real in the Western states. I mean, you still have China and Russia as big power players, but in the Western world, we now live in their wet dream corporatism. And that's why I think they're pushing for this, because things are going very fast these days. It's as if they don't care anymore. They don't even have in the old days, they have the decency, at least, to pretend about everything, right? They at least try to convince us, no, live in this fantasy. No, everything is working. Nowadays, they don't even care. And I think there's two reasons for this. One reason is to do with BRICS, and the whole rest of the world is coming together now. They are gathering around the banners of China, Russia, and all this. So it's because BRICS countries have realized that the Anglo-American elite is completely off the rails. Now they're really trying to, before they respected us, they let us, now they're trying to infiltrate us, they're trying to take over our societies. Now we want control here, thanks that old school power elite in those countries, because in those countries, China and Russia especially, the elites there are still so old school that they're tied up to the state. Whereas the globalists, they need to take them down. So I think the BRICS power faction, the multipolar world they are trying to force through, is a threat to them. The second threat, which is the real threat, and it's a threat even to Russia and China, that threat, and much thanks to a guest you had on, helped me understand that. Not just her, but she was a good big help, and that's Dr. Victoria. What's her last name? Sorry, Victoria, I forgot your last name, but that's Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin is a huge threat to them all, because Bitcoin won't just transform the economy, which is the power today. It will also, as you probably know, transform the institutions, the organization of humankind, and all these older institutions will fall. It's the first factor I can see in history that can actually just take down a power elite. You don't even need the French Revolution with your guns and your flags, right? This can just happen overnight. It's fantastic.
Comment? Yeah. There's a load of stuff you said there that had me thinking, especially when you were saying about you got onto, it's amazing. You were talking about something, and I was thinking of Ivor Bryce and Ian Fleming, because you were talking about how the fascists weren't only they weren't only in Germany. They were Nazis all over the place, and they were high functioning, clever Nazis. They were doing clever things. They knew what they were doing behind the scenes, and they were in every country. And in actual fact, Ian Fleming, and I believe it was alongside Ivor Bryce, because you mentioned about how they're able to say about Specter and spot out all of these things. Well, that was because they were part of it, because Ivor Bryce was a member of the OSS, one of the rare British members of the OSS, to be sure. Most of the OSS were made up of Americans, and he stood out as a sore thumb. And of course, he had met Ian Fleming on a beach when they were younger. Families went there to avoid the Zeppelin attacks during World War I, where they flew the Zeppelins over London and dropped bombs.
Exotic, eh?
Yeah, I know. So they went to Cornwall to hide away. The families went to Cornwall to hide away. And there, a young Ivor Bryce met a young Ian Fleming, and that was headed towards James Bond. But not only James Bond, by the 1930s, Ivor Bryce and Ian Fleming were published in a magazine that was Fascista magazine, and was just a British fascist magazine. So they were on board with it all. They had people like Augustus John and people write for their magazine, and it was getting some traction. But of course, the war split that over. Now, I've seen modern movies try and paint Ivor Bryce as a communist when they look back at him, and it's just insane. It's like a retelling of history completely, and that whole period is really interesting because, of course, Ian Fleming's working on Operation, I think it was GoldenEye. In actual fact, he later called his.
But he was involved in a much more relevant operation to what we're talking about.
Go on.
The operation was actually called Operation James Bond. That's where he got the name from.
Yeah.
And that was and it's Creighton, Christopher Creighton, which is I think that's the pen name, and his real name was he was the model of 007. What was his real name? Ainsbury. Oh, I forgot.
I'm not sure.
I have this from the brilliant British journalist. I'm so bad with names today.
Yeah, I know, me too.
I'll get back to it. Anyway, this operation was about abducting Bormann and getting him out of the ruins of München before the Soviet troops came in. That was an MG. Is it 5 or 6? I always mix those two up. MI5?
MI5. Well, MI6 is foreign. MI5 is
that was
domestic.
an MI6 operation. It was a called Operation James Bond. Remember, this is before the James Bond novels, right?
Yeah.
It didn't mean anything.
Well, those novels started to be written because they were just mapping out their own experiences on paper. A lot of it was just them.
Fleming coded the Bormann Brotherhood, or Odessa, or Die Spinne, or whatever you want to call them. The spider has many names, but he used octopus, which is also a real name for them, and Specter.
Yeah, and he didn't last long after the movie rights had been bought and he got popular. I mean, Ivor Bryce was a really interesting character, and he of course married into the Huntington Hartford dynasty that I covered in an article for the Black Hand series called The Real Jeffrey Epstein, or the original, Jeffrey Epstein, which is George Huntington Hartford, who liked them prime, he liked them 17 and below, and he had like so many similarities to Jeffrey Epstein, it's insane. But he also was close with Ivor Bryce, of course, because of his relationship with Josephine Bryce, who was his sister. And they you know, there was a lot of living out in the West Indies and planning operations out there. They all had a little bit. Ian Fleming bought his own little place out there. But who they were planning it for, who really knows? Because these guys, they all got the same sort of ties. They all go back. I'm having a, you know, for me, it's really hard to know where I'm going to find the truth about anything. I have to find a strand of something that is unknown and follow that strand, and then all of the information comes from it once I collate it all together. And then from that way, I find new evidence. So where, if do you have a place, or do you have an idea of somewhere where no one else has looked that you would like to know, somewhere where you know, no one else has been able to either prove something or just answer the question? For me, for example, to find out who Klaus Schwab's father was, when I was asked that question, to find it out meant loads of research, and then from it I discovered all about Kissinger's International Seminar and all of these other things, and it leads me along a line of being able to uncover the information that I didn't know from asking the one question. Where's the point where you've said, oh, what's that?
What it's funny you ask synchronicity again, because I was going to recommend a couple of guests for you, and I think their work in itself will help you go certain places. But I first recommend 2 books. These authors don't live anymore. Had they lived, I would have recommended them as guests. One is Larislag Farago, and the other one is Paul Manning, the journalist. Both of those guys did a lot of work. I would also say, whatever you think of the Lyndon Rouge organization, they are excellent in flushing out hidden power players. They've done a good job. You don't have to be on board with their philosophy or politics to recognize that. But a couple of guests I think you would enjoy talking with, because they have dig deep into related matters to what we discussed today. Because when you are going to cover power analysis like we've done today, there's so many ways to go, there's so many places to go, that it's not just one guest or one perspective, right? But particularly, as we've talked, Lawrence de Mello, who she's a Brit, I'd recommend getting her on.
Mm-hmm.
Another one that I think you could talk with for hours, although it'd be interesting to see if anyone, either of you, could get a word in. He's also a Brit. His name is, I'm trying to look it up because I'm blanking on it. Tony Gosling.
Oh, right. Okay, no, me and Tony Gosling, we know each other.
You know him already, right?
Oh, yeah. He's helped me out a few times on different things back really early on, and he's been supported.
And you haven't had him on, or you have had him on?
No.
Even I've had him on.
Yeah, I know. Most people have had him on. He actually sends me like we have a really I'd say a strange relationship. Let me just make sure that but he's an extremely interesting character, that's for sure. And
very knowledgeable.
Yeah, no. We are talking about exactly the same person. I thought we were talking about he's again he's one of those names where one of those times where I'm blanking on names myself. I'm like, is that the person I'm thinking of? That is the person I'm thinking of. But in actual fact,
but he's the Johnny Vedmore of 20-30 years ago.
Well, maybe I that would be a good way. When I first started investigating, and I came across by the time I got to 2019, I was publishing about Nicole Youngcomb, the Epstein associate that no one was talking about, as I titled the article, and Tony Gosling had me on his show. And I remember him chastising me for calling her Junkerman when her name shouldn't be Junkerman, it should be Youngcomb. And I thought, oh, you are an old school journalist. And he doesn't see the same.
He can afford being a little anal.
I know. Indeed. We don't see necessarily the same things or the same reasons behind things. And I think he has a lot more respect for entities like the BBC than I do from working within it. And he
hates them today, though.
Well, yeah, but he also sees them as being like somehow a victim. Like that's what I feel. I might be misrepresenting, but that's how I feel.
I get what you're saying, and just the fact that he's not doing podcasts, he's doing radio still. He's an old schooler, right?
He is, and that's what really interests me. But then there's been multiple backwards and forwards where he realized that Nicole Youngcomb meant business when she had one of his shows pulled off line from all of these different platforms. But there's been a couple of backwards and forwards between me and Tony, and he always keeps me abreast of something he thinks I will find important, and I like him as a person. I really like him as a person. I think he's got a good soul, and he's doing things for the right reasons. So that is someone that I should definitely have on. You're right.
And if you can get her on, I would also have on Lawrence de Mello. She can talk for hours about, so like, for example, if you want to dig into the propaganda duo scandal, the P2, the thing that was featured in The Godfather 3. Back in the day, right, some stuff could come out in fiction. They fictionalized certain things behind the scenes, right?
Oh, yeah, clever, isn't it?
Vatican Bank, all that stuff. She can tell you everything about Bormann and other surviving Nazis in South America. In fact, she lives in Argentina. And has been married into families who are a part of the German expat corporate banker elite. So she knows a lot from the inside. I mean, she was banned. She was smeared by BBC, which is a badge of honor, right?
They're having trouble with me. They tried to co-opt me. They tried to get me on their ship. They said basically I was saying stuff out loud about one of their DJs, BBC Radio 1 DJ, and my own experience of him basically looking like he was doing very bad things to very young girls in a hotel I was working in, and I had free meetings with him, exchanges with him, and I wrote an article about it as well eventually. But the BBC, they thought they were going to be able to get me to be like in awe of their amazing organization and get on board with them with an investigation and be like, oh, BBC has come calling, now I'm dropping all my integrity. And
but that's how now they know, right? No, that's they're obliged to do that, because when they say up and coming journalists that we don't see that much anymore. When we see someone actually doing work, they have to try that card first, right? They don't go straight to killing you these days.
No.
First thing they try to do, right? They try to, oh, he wants a career. Let's suck him in here, and then we have him. When that doesn't work, right, they have to go to number 2, number 3 in the playbook. So that's a part of the game. But good for you. You're on the
yeah.
radar.
There is a level. The first step of contact they made was someone who was not contacting via like a messenger within Twitter. Was much more. Oh, I'm just working on a project. We're not allowed to talk about it. I'm just an assistant. Then the next one was the person who was organizing it all. Later on, it was like, oh, your name come up again. I'd already told the first one I'm not interested in working with the BBC, but this one I did what we were talking about before. I'm not sure if we talked about it at the start of the show or before, but watching people and how they act, how they behave. There's no point in getting angry straight away at something. What I really want to do, what deep down, like if I was just to let go of myself and just let my emotions take over, my ego take over, then the BBC contact me and I'd say, get away, you're the worst people in the world and I hate you and I'm not going to speak to you, and I'd hang up immediately. That's what would happen. But instead, what I did was I had a 2-hour conversation with her and I told her all of the truth, but I listened to what she said, how she said it, how she was acting. I asked her questions that were off on a tangent to test out like how she responded to different things, whether she was focused on one thing or another. And I carefully analyzed her to be extremely dishonest, and I enjoyed letting her put forward her pitch, knowing that I was acting as though that I was very interested in working with them, and that when the time came, I would just say, no, I'm not interested.
Yeah.
So it's really important to see how they work, so you can see how manipulative they can be, and you can let them just show all of their cards off as much as possible. In the same way, I mean, it's a problem with media in general. I was on a federal Russian documentary channel the other day. Apparently, they came to me and asked me if they could interview me about Klaus Schwab and Henry Kissinger, and I was like, yes, I can always speak to anybody about that. That's my thing. I don't care where you're from. Also, like I've spoken on Iranian TV recently, where they come to me and they said,
TV?
and they said, we're doing this documentary about something. I can't even remember what it was. I don't do anything about it. I've never done anything about it. They just saw me and were just like, oh, look, anti-establishment person who's up and coming. Let's get him on as quickly as possible. And I was like,
man, if they hadn't crushed RT, you would probably have a job for them today.
Yeah, I know. Oh, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Get the job for somebody.
Strategy was brilliant. They learned from the Americans during the Soviet Union. What the Americans do, Radio Free Europe or whatever, right? They try to ship media into behind the Iron Curtain so people could. Yeah. Okay, today it's established by university studies that the West, American, Europe, Five Eyes countries, have less press freedom than happened under Soviet Union. That's number one. Number two, which is even worse, is that under Soviet Union, people were aware that they were being propaganda.
Yeah.
People here aren't even aware of it. So what the Russians did was brilliant. All they did was, look, all the great real journalists have, at least since the Iraq War, been overtly or covertly squeezed out. The mediocre people, the people with agendas, the prostitutes, and everybody who was wrong has been promoted. So here we have a huge class of unemployed real reporters and journalists, investigators, everything. Let's just give them a haven. Let them organize it themselves. They had Americans who was running RT. It's not, Russian state TV. No, BBC is much more British state TV than RT ever was. RT was a haven for all, and it wasn't even just one political side, libertarians, progressives, anything, right? And it had a heyday, and then they crushed RT a few years ago.
Yeah.
But I have to say, we in Norway are better off than English, because We have our own BBC. It's called the Norwegian Broadcasting, NRK. But here, you don't have to pay for them. You can opt out.
Mm-hmm.
But in Britain, you have to pay
Yeah,
for that fucking rot of corruption. So
I know.
it's
Isn't it corruption? Isn't it corruption? Well, we're coming up to the end of this now.
Yeah.
I tell you, some of the things we've talked about have made my head want to go and research different things and list to all of these different people. But I mean,
just want to say, I asked Johnny before we started, how long do you estimate? And he gave me the normal time range. I was thinking, should I make a comment about how I'm doing long form all the time? You know, for me, it's not enough with an hour. But I was thinking, no, let's this play out and see how it goes. And yes, 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
Welcome to my world, long form.
I'm not surprised at all. I know, but when you're talking on these lines, and this is really important to have, like, for me, a free ability to go at different places, not to have questions written up beforehand. I want to use my own knowledge and then help get knowledge off you, and then we mix it all together and see what we get at the end. And what we get is something that is very close to being the same thing. We see the entity out there growing, and you're doing a job of going like talking to loads of different people like myself who are trying to put things together, but it's important for us to be able to have the idea of what the bigger overarching structure is. What are you going to do? What's your plans in the future? What are you excited about right now that help
if
us?
It works, don't fix it. I'm just sailing on, man, until I hit a brick road. And I have to warn you, as the mainstream media is sinking, they are going to lash out more and more desperately. So what we've seen so far is nothing. I think they're going to try to ban new media eventually, just by brute force. And there's so much conglomerating in the world right now that if they will succeed or not will depend on many things that's happening. So that I don't know. But unless they manage to actually just force us to be quiet, you and me are going to inherit the world.
Yeah,
agreed.
Like Agreed. Because when after a cycle of lies, hypernormalization, distortion, when you were talking just now about the fact that the differences between, like, and this is what I was trying to put into words, and I've put into words better before, I think, is that the difference between Leninist propaganda and CIA propaganda was quite simply that if it was Leninist propaganda that was used during the Soviet Union, you were told it's propaganda, brother, and you were told you was to spread the propaganda, brother, and you knew that meant that a lot of it was a twisting of the truth and lies to make people think a certain way, including yourself, and you were going to go and be involved in that, and that gave you pride for being able to go and spread the word that is part of your ideology. The subversiveness of the what we see in Western intelligence is, let's not tell them that it's propaganda, let's make them believe. And media, let's pretend that it's media, when in really fact all of these channels.
But isn't that cracking these days? Like I said, it seems that they don't care anymore. It's like they don't pretend anymore. Now it's back to brute force. It's very interesting time. Like the Chinese say, may you live in interesting times. It's more a curse than a blessing, but
yeah.
We do that indeed.
I do like it in that sense, right? I'd say that there is if you look at Edelman PR's trust barometer and how people feel about the media in all the different countries in the world, it's back down after COVID to something like minus 80%. And it'll keep going that way until it breaks apart. And you're quite right, they're trying to co-opt what's new media nowadays, but it's not going to happen because people like me and you are out there. Can you tell people where they find you? I know I told them at the start, but where would you like people to find you?
So if you go to my website and you donate $1 or more, I don't care how much, it's up to you. It's a model that actually works, the honor system. Then you get access to everything we do at forumborealis.net. Now, if you're a cheapskate or you can't afford it, or you're already paying enough already, I would recommend a podcast, any podcast platform. Spotify, Apple, it doesn't matter. We're everywhere. Then you get not all the shows that are on the website, but you get almost all the shows. And then if you go to the video platforms, Rumble, YouTube, etc., look up Forum Borealis, then you get the minimum dose that we have had energy to make into videos. Eventually, everything is coming out, but it's like the system is one in, one out on the website, so that at any given time, there's at least 20 unreleased. Eventually, everything gets released to podcast, and eventually all that becomes videos. So I would start with podcast, maybe. Then you can get and pick and choose whatever you prefer. You're not going to be into everything. But I can promise you one thing: long form, in depth, whatever the subject matter is.
Yeah, that's what I like. I like a lot of that, and I think loads of more people are moving over to that. Just to mention that the person you mentioned earlier was Victoria Jones, who was the crypto lady, Bitcoin. Yeah, she's a clever lady. Truth Decay was her book. I mean, I would encourage people to go across to forumborealis.net, donate that $1 and get the content, and start to I mean, that's a brilliant way to do things. I'm trying to understand how to monetize at the moment so that I can have support, because I need support too. But I mean, that seems like a very good way. So, hey, thanks for coming on and speaking.
If you throw me a buck, guys, throw Johnny a buck too. He needs to get his journalism covered, financed, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
BBC
a couple
ain't
of bucks here and there. Yeah, stop paying your BBC license and split that license fee up amongst all of the various journalists and various truth tellers out there. Is what I say. Let's start funding the people who do good stuff. Thanks so much for being on, Al.
You too.
Cheers.